Blog Talk Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a problem. I would like to introduce
Bigfoots Pad Paranormal Investigations team.
Yeah. Yep.
Welcome to another edition of the Bigfoots Pad Paranormal Radio. Today's show, we are going to be talking to the great and famous ufologist, Stanton Friedman. What do you guys think about today's show? Going to be pretty good?
Yeah. Oh, it always is.
Yep. Well, let's say, Nick, before we start the show, Nick, do you have any team news really quick?
Well, yeah, really quick. I'll just get into a thing or two. Well, this year we were not able to get onto our yearly Paratour, but we are seeking to perhaps get out and do a series of investigations coming up here in the next month or two. We're looking at some things more in the Las Vegas area because we just want to delve into the local paranormal scene. We often travel to California and various other parts of the West Coast, but we thought it would be more appropriate this time to really just see what's in our own backyard. Should be really exciting, guys.
All right, well, I'm going to call our guest for today, and when he answers, we're going to have Nick introduce him or that thing. Here he goes, Nick. You there?
Yep, I'm here.
Don't forget to introduce us too, Nick.
Good evening.
Hello, Stanton. Hello, Mr. Friedman?
Yeah, Stan, that's fine.
Hello, Stanton. I am Nicholas Poirier from Bigfoots Pad Paranormal Investigations. We have you right now on our radio show, which we scheduled to do an interview with today.
Yes.
On the line with me, I have my associates Jeremy, Tim, and Brent.
Okay. I'll let him be on there.
Well, Mr. Friedman, I'll introduce you first, and we'll jump right into the meat of the interview. All right,
okay, I guess
listening.
I can handle that.
Of course, everybody listening, this is, I would appropriately, I think, title him the Godfather of Ufology, Stanton Friedman.
What's good about
would you? We usually begin off our segments with asking our guests just to state a little bit about themselves and their backgrounds.
Okay.
Would you care to do so?
Of course. I mean, I'm an old guy, so I could go on for 2 or 3 hours, but I'll keep it down to a few minutes. I grew up in New Jersey, spent 2 years at Rutgers University, 3 years at the University of Chicago, majoring in physics, got bachelor's and master's degrees in 1955 and 56. Carl Sagan and I were classmates for 3 years in the physics department at that time. Then I spent 14 years in industry working on a wide variety of advanced, classified, very exciting, and eventually canceled government research and development programs. My specialty is canceled government programs. That included General Electric, General Motors, Westinghouse, TRW Systems, McDonnell Douglas, Aerojet, General Nucleonics, and all kind of weird stuff. Nuclear airplanes for GE, and fission rockets for Westinghouse, and fusion rockets and nuclear power plants for space for Aerojet. And I was really looking forward to the best job I ever got offered. I was supposed to figure out how flying saucers work for McDonnell Douglas, but unfortunately, as I was driving across the country to take that job, the funding for that program got canceled. It's great to walk into a company and say, you realize we just laid off 5,000 people. Yeah, I know that. And from there on, it was full-time, pretty much, ufologizing, if I can make up a word. And I'm a nuclear physicist. My specialty was radiation shielding, which was challenging, exciting, because shielding tends to be heavy, and with the nuclear power plants you need it, but if the shielding is too heavy, you won't get off the ground. So, and the temperatures are usually high in all the programs I worked on, so you can't use lead and polyethylene the way the Navy does. You got to use high melting point materials and so forth. Anyway, it was exciting. It was intriguing. I learned a great deal about how advanced technology works. And these programs are pretty good size, even though the public probably hadn't heard about them. When I was working on nuclear airplanes in 1958 for GE, we spent $100 million that year, employed 3,500 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. So it wasn't 6 professors and 20 grad students. It was a major program. I mean, $100 million is a lot of money in 58. I mean, now it's, chicken feed, but I guess. But so it was exciting, and I got interested in flying saucers by reading a book in 1958, read a bunch more books, some of which were garbage. I got to know Frank Edwards, decided I wanted to go public. He wrote a book, Flying Saucers, Serious Business, back in the mid-60s. He was a journalist and active in NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And I asked him for recommendations. He gave me the name of somebody in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at KDKA, big 50,000 watt clear channel station. My first program had a great name, Contact, for Westinghouse, and he gave me a name, and I called the guy, and it was one of those, don't call us, we'll call you. Well, less than a month later, they called me because somebody canceled at the last minute. They called me at 6:30 to be on a 7 o'clock show, and I live near the station. And I'd love to find out how many people they called first, really scraping the barrel. And I did the program, and somebody at work at Westinghouse heard it, asked me to speak to her book review club, which was reading Frank's book. So my first lecture was in her living room. I was on Contact a number of times, did a lot more programs, learning my trade, you might say. And I started to branch out a bit to colleges and professional groups. Engineering Society of Detroit was sold out 3 weeks in advance for 1,008 people for dinner and a talk, and there wasn't one negative question. And the thing is, I was young, but I sure respected the people who belonged to the engineering societies, sections of the Institute of Electrical Electronic Engineers and American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. I spoke to the Los Alamos Nuclear Society section, 500 people, no negative questions. I couldn't help but be impressed by the response of my professional colleagues. I mean, I was young then, of course, but still. So when the bottom fell out of the advanced nuclear and space systems business, I went full-time. And I've never stopped. And I'm still going strong at age 48. Oh, I wish. 78. And the thing is that I bring to the subject a peculiar background that helps me deal with some of the objections. I mean, let me state very clearly, I'm convinced some UFOs are alien spacecraft. We're dealing with a cosmic Watergate. There are no good objections to those two conclusions, and we're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. So I don't hedge. I'm not saying it would be interesting if possibly this could be alien visitation. I'm saying these are alien visitations. And, the separate question, why, and all that sort of thing. And what I've found, what I bring is that I worked on far-out propulsion systems. And that's a very important part of this because there are an awful lot of people, the ancient academics and fossilized physicists, who seem to think that you can't get here from there, which is true if you're talking about bicycles, but I'm not concerned about bicycles anymore. I can deal with, how could they possibly make those right-angle turns, stuff like that. And I worked on classified programs, so people who claim governments can't keep secrets, that's pretty silly. It's not true. Governments can keep secrets. There's a whole chapter in my book, Flying Saucers and Science, about secrets that have been kept, the cosmic Watergate. Big ones. We're talking multi-billion-dollar secrets. But one of the problems that I deal with, I worked in industry, and I find that the academic community seems to think the only place research gets done is academia, which is nonsense. You want to build a stealth airplane, you go to Lockheed. $10 billion, 10 years. You don't go to some professors to figure out how to do it. I kept secrets. I've been to 20 archives. I know how security works. Another thing I bring to the question is that I think I've answered 50,000 questions over the years because I do classroom visits and seminars and after the lecture and on radio and television shows and all that sort of stuff. So I've had to think about the why questions. Why would aliens come here? Why doesn't the government tell us what it knows? Why don't they land on the White House lawn? That's one of the sillier questions. In case people haven't noticed, the President of the United States, no matter who he is, doesn't speak for 7 billion Earthlings. Just as a side comment. Also, it's a no-fly zone over the White House. So. And in 1952, they were seen over the White House, but airplanes rose up, and they were seen on radar, and they were chased away, I guess you could say. And I've had to take advantage of, I was in high school debating. We were a state championship team in Linden, New Jersey, way back in about 1950, do I dare say. And I learned that you got to tell the truth. You got to keep your wits about you. You got to know both sides of the argument. You cannot lie. And I learned that if you don't have facts in hand, it's not a good idea to put mouth in gear. Somebody will find you out. And so I've enjoyed a number of important cases. I'm the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident. I was the first to publish about the star map work dealing with the Betty and Barney Hill case. I helped Frank Fascino, who's going to be on, what's today, 3 days from now? I just got his new book with a fancy-looking cover, I'll tell you. And I wrote the foreword and the epilogue for his book. That's the Braxton County Monster case, Flatwoods, if you will. So I've been involved in a number of these, but I also, I've given over 700 lectures in all 50 states, 10 Canadian provinces, 18 other countries. So I've had a chance to find what other people think about this stuff. And a lot of professional groups, small groups, big groups, I've talked to as many as 2,000. And frankly, I've only had 11 hecklers, and 2 of them were drunk. So I'm in a position to say I have my finger on the pulse of the world about UFOs, at least as much as anybody else does. And one of the things I find is on those few critics, the skeptics, if you will, debunkers is a better word. Skeptic says, well, maybe. Debunker says, well, I know there's nothing to this, so I don't need to look at any evidence. We'll probably be talking about this in a few nights, but it's like Joe Nichols' explanation for Flatwoods. Really brilliant. It was a 6-foot owl. And I haven't been able to find anybody else who lives around Flatwoods who has ever heard of a 6-foot owl around there, And Joe visited Flatwoods, but he didn't talk to the primary witnesses and didn't go to the actual location of the event. This is serious investigation? I don't think so. just as he explained away Roswell as an unknown public information officer put out an unauthorized press release, both of which are nonsense. His name has been a matter of record for, 30 years. First book was 1980, so 32 years. And he definitely was authorized by Colonel Blanchard. And, of course, Joe doesn't bother to mention that the group was the most elite military group in the world. They had atomic bombs on campus and dropped the 2 on Japan and 2 more in Operation Crossroads in the Pacific in 46. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. And what the public doesn't know, I'm sure not going to tell them. Those are 2 of the rules. And if you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. Nobody will know the difference. And finally, do your research by proclamation. So I specialize in pointing out the nonsense of the nasty, noisy negativists. That tell you enough about me to get you started?
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, to start the show off, our questions are kind of all over the place. We're getting a bunch in on different websites and things. But, our friend Brent on the line, you said you had a question for him, Brent?
Yeah, I actually wanted to know what your opinion on SETI is. And
okay.
What do you think about them?
Well, SETI is thought to mean Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. What it actually means is Silly Effort to Investigate, SETI. It's based on bad science, wrong assumptions, silliness. I mean, the assumption is that there are intelligent beings out there who are sending us messages, they don't say why, and using technology appropriate to us. Our first long-distance radio communication was 1901, Marconi with Newfoundland and England. Does he really believe that nobody has moved beyond that stage? Do they really believe that? I mean, my favorite target, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli, 2 stars, southern sky. They come out of the Betty and Barney Hill case. It's described in detail in the book Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience by myself and Kathleen Marden, who did most of the work. She's Betty's niece, has all the hypnosis tapes and all that sort of stuff. Well, there are 2 stars that are just down the street, 39.3 light years from here. That's pretty darn close, which are only an eighth of a light year apart, or 35 times closer to each other than the sun is to the next star over, so we're out in the boondocks. And they just happen to be a cool billion years older than the sun. Now, why would anybody around those places use technology that's akin to ours? Does it make any sense? Furthermore, they entirely reject the notion that they should look at the data about UFOs on the basis that there is no evidence. So you never find them referencing the large-scale scientific studies that I refer people to. That's not science. They also don't seem to understand that we might be a threat to the neighborhood. Who, us? Well, doggone, folks, you might have noticed that even though we didn't discover the neutron until 1932, and the first chain reaction was 1939 or so, 38, our first atomic bomb was 1945. First H-bomb was 1952. Released the energy at 10 million tons of TNT. Now, if you were an alien and studied our planet for a while and what we do, you'd say, these guys are idiots. They're a primitive society. Their major activity is tribal warfare. They only killed 60 million of their own kind in World War II. They destroyed 1,700 cities. Would anybody in their right mind out there want us to go out there? They're not going to worry about landing on a White House lawn. They want to make sure we don't go out there with our brand of friendship. They don't seem to worry about things. That's hostility where I come from. You know, people forget we have exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons on this planet. Fortunately, only 2 on people. Fortunately. But there are still plenty of them out there. So what I'm saying is that they leave out the most important things. They'll worry about gee, our CO2 level's going up. Isn't that terrible to have such pollution? It's not pollution. Every living plant requires CO2. So their approach is unscientific, irrational, ill-conceived. You get my point, I think.
Yes.
And they are not looking for extraterrestrial intelligence. They're looking for radio signals that happen to have been produced by a technique that's consistent with our techniques for producing radio signals. Well, I hate to tell it, but, I don't use a slide rule anymore. I was using it 50 years ago. Why would aliens be stuck at our level? It doesn't make any sense to me.
No.
And especially, why not look at the evidence? I always refer to their books. Jill Tarter says there is no evidence. Seth Shostak admitted he hadn't read any of the 5 large-scale scientific studies that I talked about in the lecture that he heard. Now, he admits he has my book on his nightstand. He said that on Coast to Coast, but he didn't say he'd read it, you understand. If aliens are coming here, who needs SETI? Learn sign language. That would be more appropriate. So you can understand my jaundiced view about SETI. It doesn't make any sense.
So, to kind of piggyback off of that last question, do you think Carl Sagan putting a record, basically, I guess, to put it in layman's terms, into space was a good idea?
Putting a record, you mean on the Pioneer spacecraft?
Yes.
Well, I think it's fun and games, and if he wants to delude himself into thinking that the aliens need information from us about what's going on, that's pretty silly. Let me give you another example. And Carl and I were friendly. I visited his home a year before he died. Like I say, we saw each other every day for 3 years. But he has publicly stated there are interesting sightings that aren't reliable. There are reliable sightings that aren't interesting, but there are no interesting and reliable sightings, which sounds very profound and is totally false. He doesn't give any references. If he looked at Blue Book Special Report 14, biggest study ever done for the United States government, mind you, he would have found the better the quality of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable. He'd have found that the probability that the unknowns or just misknowns was less than 1%. He would have found the better the quality of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable. But he didn't tell anybody any of that. They get a totally false impression. I mean, admittedly, the Secretary of the Air Force went even farther. He said the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available. There was a separate category for insufficient information, and the unknowns were 21.5%. So this is the kind of lying and misrepresentation that bothers me. Scientists are supposed to stick with the facts, and most of the noisy negativists don't. They don't even want to admit that there are facts out there. So, that diagram, was neat. It tells Earthlings a little bit about how we might tell somebody else something. It tells us nothing about what aliens are doing, who certainly know more than we do.
There is a guy in the chat room that's asking you, he says, how are we a threat to them if they're light years away, is what he says.
Well, because we can go light years, not in an instant. Can I get to San Francisco in a 3-day period? Well, not if I'm riding a bicycle, but if I fly, I can get there. Let's talk about going to the stars. First, I found that when I do colloquium and stuff like that at the college physics departments, which I do before an evening lecture, and it's usually because some professor thinks he's going to make me look foolish instead of my making him look foolish. But it only takes 1 year at 1g acceleration to get to the speed of light. That's the first thing. Secondly, and I've had professors guess 1,000 years, 1 year. And we can stand more than 1g, incidentally. Secondly, these guys all want half an Einstein. Einstein said you can't go faster than the speed of light. They forget to add Oh, when you get close to the speed of light, time slows down for the things moving that fast. We don't want to mention that, you see. To go 37 light years at 99.99% of the speed of light only takes 6 months pilot time. You go out, come back, marry your granddaughter's best friend. If you're going to talk about movement, transport, whatever you want to call it, you got to look at future technology, not past technology. I mean, what's his name? Magellan. His ship, he didn't make it, but his ship took 3 years to go around the Earth. Is that the time we would expect it has to take? Well, no. Around the world in 80 days in the 1800s. And today we got space stations up there that go around every 90 minutes. They don't use sails, of course. Technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The future is not an extrapolation of the past. You got to change how you do things. I mean, look at the computer on your desk. Is that like an old desk calculator? No, not at all. So when people say you can't get here from there, well, if we look backwards, sure, you can't. But again, think of Magellan and think of the space station. From 3 years to 90 minutes. And incidentally, about going close to the speed of light, the big accelerator over there in CERN has particles going 99.9999, I think, percent of the speed of light. So it's not unknown of by Earthlings. And sure, you're not going to use fusion to go meet somebody for dinner at 7 o'clock. And if you come here from another solar system, I doubt very much that when you get here, you're going to move around at the speed of light. It only takes 1/7 of a second to go around Earth at the speed of light. How do you meet somebody for coffee at that speed? I mean, it's silly. And the analog here is large aircraft carriers, and they are big, carry about 75 little airplanes. The airplanes can fly for maybe 2 hours if you're lucky. The aircraft carriers, without refueling, the aircraft carriers, nuclear-powered ones, can operate for 18 years without refueling. There's a big difference. In other words, you pick your mode of transport for the situation. And so I hear more silly nonsense about technology than you can imagine. None of these guys ever worked on these programs, I guess. And no, the classified programs weren't discussed in the unclassified literature particularly. So, what's surprising about that?
I just have a quick question, Stan. We have Art Campbell coming on the show next weekend, and I was just curious, have you been to the San Augustine site before?
I was the first guy to report about it. Sure.
Because he really didn't say much about it, so I was just kind of curious.
Well, yes, I've been there. I talked to the local rancher. You can read about it in my book, Crash at Corona, the definitive study of the Roswell incident. Happened about the same time. And I was there when Gerald Anderson was traipsing about. I talked with Art at considerable length and encouraged him as much as I could. And he's done one heck of a lot of work to dig out the facts. He's on the West Coast. I'm on the far East Coast. So it's hard for me to get to the plains. It's not so hard for him.
Because I know a lot about the Brazils and all that. I just don't know much about the San Augustine one.
Well, the plains of San Augustine, it's where the Very Large Array Radio Telescope is. It's a large flat area surrounded by, some of the mountains are 9,000 feet high. And that's why it's out there. The idea is you want very little interference from Earth-based radio signals. And ain't nobody building condos out there, I'll tell you that. And the background radio level, in other words, is very low. That's why the large array is out there. And it's very impressive. It is not used primarily for SETI, even though it was used in the background of Contact with Jodie Foster, playing really the role of Jill Tarter. It's, the dishes are 85 feet in diameter. There's a whole couple dozen of them, and they're moved on a big array. They're a fascinating place. I've been inside at the control center, if you will. But it's the least densely populated of all the counties in New Mexico, Catron County. And that's got a lot of competition for that honor, incident, because there aren't a lot of people in New Mexico. It's desert, so that means you need about 80 acres of cow. And so the ranches are big, very large. And they're sensitive. They don't like people driving four-wheel drive vehicles on them, because when it does rain, you get ruts. The animals are in trouble then, So I was the first to hear the story. I gave a lecture at Bemidji, Minnesota, Bemidji State College, way back, 79, 78, that time frame. And somebody came up to me after it and asked if I'd ever heard about a crashed saucer in New Mexico. And I had. I'd already, of course, heard about Roswell. I was the first to hear about that, first to talk to Jesse Marcel. And I said, tell me more. I didn't tell them what I knew. And they gave me the name of the rancher. They didn't give me the name of the rancher. They gave me the name of Barney Barnett, who worked for the government and who helped the ranchers out there, civil engineer. Water is a major problem out there. So, to set up places where the water can accumulate, if you will. And Barney was dead, but they gave me the name of his niece, and I eventually contacted her. Bill Moore and I contacted them. We found other people who'd been out there. And I know that there are people who say, oh, nothing ever happened out in the plains of St. Augustine. Look at the evidence. And there is evidence, and Art will fill you in on it. Good man.
Well, I'd like to gravitate now back towards a question dealing with technology, because occasionally we have a rabble-rouser who likes to appear in our chat rooms and likes to start debates with me. And we had a debate last year, and I'd like to see what your opinion is on this. We were talking about whether alien technology would have to be complex versus simple to make it across the vast distances.
Now, why did you say vast distances? Why didn't you say from nearby stars? Everybody always says immense distances, huge distances. Compared to what? The galaxy's 100,000 light years across. I'm talking about 39 light years. That's nothing. It's down the street. So, compared to what is always the question. And there ain't a lot between the stars. Nothing much gets in your way. So, now, complex, again, is a relative term. Is my computer complex? Well, it would be if you gave it to somebody on the planet 60 years ago. He certainly couldn't have duplicated it. My little wristwatch is, it's cheap, $25. It's digital. But if you gave it to the smartest people on the planet in the mid-30s, they couldn't figure, they'd know it was a watch, because you can see the time on it. They know it's battery operated. But there's a chip in there. They wouldn't know how to analyze it, and even if they could analyze it, they wouldn't know how to duplicate it. So is it complex? Well, compared to us, we turn out these chips. Obviously, they're pretty cheap now. They belonged in a museum 70 years ago. Priceless. So complicated, compared to what? I think an airplane's pretty complicated myself, but I'm not a pilot.
We have a question coming from one of our websites that's asking, what is your opinion on the aliens are time travelers theory?
Well, it depends on how you define that, and there's certainly more than one way to travel long distances. I mean, I can take a train across the country, or I can fly, or I can drive. Probably do it by boat if I'm willing to go a little distance out of my way. Time travel, if we are taking advantage of Einsteinian physics, that is, that time slows down as things go fast, then, what can you call that? Is that time travel? In other words, if you go out and come back and marry your granddaughter's best friend, are you a time traveler? In some ways you are. If you mean, are you warping space and time by generating some kind of a weird electromagnetic vortex? I don't know. There's no reason we think that, or we should think, that if we don't understand it, it can't be real. That's arrogant egotism and of no use. It can't be, therefore it isn't. That's stupid. My book with Kathleen Marden, Science Was Wrong, has 14 chapters, each of them starting from some smart person saying something stupid about what was impossible, including some people whose names you'd recognize. And what can I say? They were wrong because they were looking back and not future. None of us can predict the future very well, but there's no reason to think that the future is limited by what we knew in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, today's kids take for granted people walking around with little computers in their hand that they can communicate directly with probably 1 billion people around the world. That's incredible. What did Arthur C. Clarke say? Advanced technology is by definition magic? I mean, if I had told somebody that I could sit in my office in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and be in touch instantly, basically, with anybody on the planet who has another computer, if I had told somebody that 60 years ago, you'd have said, lock this guy up. Doesn't he realize how many phone lines it would take going from his place? So the future is not predictable based on the past. You'd think we'd learn that by now. And, as an example, it may sound silly, but in Flying Saucers and Science, there's a picture of me with my hand on the Apollo 12 command module. It's a round, blunt body. Came back into the atmosphere at 25,000 miles an hour. Now, anybody knew back not too many years ago that if you want to go fast in the atmosphere, you got to have a pointy nose, sharp wings, highly streamlined. The Apollo 12 command module isn't streamlined at all. It's a round, blunt body. But it works. It does the job. And we know that they tested round craft in wind tunnels in 1947, late after Roswell, in other words. So you got to be really careful, especially about listening to the ancient academics and fossilized physicists who know nothing about advanced technology. It's really sad when you look at the claims made by smart people. The best astronomer in the United States, Simon Newcomb, in 1903 October, claimed that, in a much more involved sentence, and it's in the book, that if there's one thing he was sure of, that man would never fly any distance in a vehicle. That was 3 months before the Wright brothers' first flight. What did he know about flight? Not a darn thing. And that's the way of the world. And one thing that also must be taken into account, the old methods of doing things have had a lot of money spent on them. The new ones, it's hard to get money for because there are all these nasty, noisy negativists saying stupid things about the impossibility. Makes it very hard to get support for new ideas. And sometimes there's personal risk. Billy Mitchell, fine pilot in the First World War, claimed just a few years after the war that airplanes would be sinking ships. Changed warfare entirely. Secretary of the Navy said that's nonsense. I'll stand on any ship he's talking about sinking. He was court-martialed. On November 29th, 1941, the Army-Navy football game was played, and in the program for the game, it showed a picture of the USS Arizona, huge battleship. And the statement was made, nobody's ever sunk a battleship from the sky. 8 days later was Pearl Harbor. The USS Arizona was sunk. 1,100 guys died. The Japanese knew you could sink a ship from the sky. We weren't prepared for that because we were looking backwards instead of forwards.
Yeah. I was going to say, do you have another question, Nick?
Yeah. I was going to say, Stanton, in the line of our own investigations, especially with this UFO crash we're investigating in northern Nevada, you've had a little bit of trouble from the United States government.
Only a little? Gee whiz.
I was going to say, how much and what type of obstacles have you had to go through in dealing with the government when you've done your investigations?
Well, there's several different kinds of obstacles. One of them is security, classification. I mean, I get people telling me that, oh, you can't keep secrets more than 25 years, everything's automatically disclosed at that time, declassified. That's baloney. If you go to the archives, I've been to 20 archives, and there are all kinds of myths that people claim. One of the arguments against the Majestic 12 documents, the 3 that I think are genuine, is that, well, they don't have top secret code numbers on them. And all top secret documents have to. I got 2 archivists who tell me that they got loads of top secret documents without code numbers on them. It depends. If you've got a 20-page report going to 20 different people, you have to inventory it. So, of course, you need a control number on it. But if it's from General A to General B, they don't want to go through all the paperwork. So when you get in writing from 2 different archivists, one at the Eisenhower Library and one at the Marshall Archives, that they have loads of stuff, as one of the archivists at Marshall said to me, Stan, if we had to have top secret control numbers on all top secret documents, we'd still be fighting World War II. What I'm saying is the people often don't know what they're talking about. Research by proclamation, not investigation. So it's the people, the debunkers who get in the way. Now, you do run into things that are aggravating. For example, the Navy. Now, the Navy covers a pretty good chunk of the planet. And I've heard loads of stories from sailors, what they saw when they were out on the ocean, what a whole ship of people saw. And so I write the history department there, and I'd like to have your information on UFOs. Oh, we don't have anything about UFOs. So I sent him a copy of an article that was a jointly authored article by Air Force Intelligence and Naval Intelligence. Interesting article. And they said, thank you for the interesting article, but as I told you, we don't have anything. Now, how do you prove that they do? You can't go into the files. So there are those kinds of obstacles. Also, it's kind of funny how long it takes to get a response sometime. At the Presidential Archives, you have a right to make a request, automatic response to classified documents. You can request declassification. The only trouble is, you fill out a form, and they send it in pretty quick, within a couple of weeks, to say the NSA or the CIA or the DIA or whatever, and automatic classification review. Trouble is, sometimes it was taking 2-3 years to get a response. It's not very helpful. You get a letter and you say, what did I ask for? So that's one thing that gets in the way. Also, I have talked to people who tell me, well, in front of 1,300 people, I had asked, this is a lecture audience in Texas, I asked how many people had seen a flying saucer, and I counted out about 10% of the audience, so a lot of them. How many of you were in the military at the time? 90% of the hands go down. And then when there's still some hands, as there were there, you want to tell us about it. Great line from one of the people who'd been in the service, had a sighting, reported it to the military. I can't. They told me not to say anything. What do you do? That's the way it is. I have no right to receive the classified material because I don't have a need to know or an appropriate security clearance. So I get people saying, like, on the MJ-12 stuff, one of the surprise members was Donald Menzel, supposedly a total skeptic. Well, surely he would have told his wife what he was doing. And I think, gotta be kidding. I worked under security for 14 years. I didn't tell my wife anything classified. I can't control what she says to other people, besides having signed an oath and wanting my job and not wanting to wind up in prison. You don't tell your family members. As a matter of fact, Dr. Vannevar Bush was one of the wheels on Majestic 12. He was head of the Office of Scientific Technology and Development, whatever it is, during World War II, under which was the atomic bomb and radar and 80 other areas of technology. All these guys were dead when we got the documents, but I did a lot of checking around, and I found his secretary. She was, of course, younger than he was. And I asked about security and stuff. She said, I was so concerned that I was worried that because my husband didn't have a clearance, that I might say something classified in my sleep. And she was serious. So that's the length to which people are concerned. So I haven't had anybody try to kill me while driving 200 miles from Albuquerque to Roswell. Plenty of room on the road, I'll tell you. And I have had no signs of anybody listening to my phone calls, and I don't care if they do. I respect security. But the government can be, what's the word I want to use here? Obscure. You look at the troubles that Representative Stephen Schiff ran into. When he first started and tried to get the GAO, General Accounting Office, it's got Government Accounting Office now, to look for documents about Roswell. The first time around at several facilities, they were all ready to release only what had already been released under a Freedom of Information Act request.
Oh.
And my guy says, no, we have the clearances, the GAO, to see everything. And there was a great deal of consternation on the other end. They thought they were going to get by the easy way. You also run into things, strange things. Some people have said that the Secretary of the Air Force, Sheila Widnall, had given permission for anybody who knew anything classified about Roswell to speak about it. And that's false. What she had given was permission for anybody who had classified information about Roswell to talk to Colonel Weaver, because he had clearances for all highly classified programs. He had need-to-knows coming out his ears. That was his specialty. Disinformation, I might add. There's a big difference between saying you can talk to the colonel. He's not going to talk to anybody, of course. So misrepresentation is fairly common. And often by people who are ignorant. It's not that they know there's information there, but they think if there was, they would know about it, and they don't, so there must not be, and therefore they'll say there isn't any. But in terms of obstacles, no personal difficulties have I had. I haven't been threatened. Of course, you might say I'm doing what they want done, get the public ready for when big disclosure day comes, whenever that will be.
Yeah.
They might not be so happy if the two movies that have been optioned from two of my books, Magic Men, M-A-J-I-C, and Betty and Barney, which is based on the book, captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. I say that only because people, I hate to say this, but more people watch movies than read books, darn it.
Yeah.
So if the movies get made, he says, hopefully, and we're on the fourth screenplay for Magic Men, and so that's a good sign. And I've been told this past week that by Bryce Zabel, who's got the rights, his company, Stellar Productions, he did Dark Skies on television back.
Oh, yeah.
He's a Hollywood wheel. And he said they've had some very good responses from people who have seen the scripts. So I'm an optimist. And who knows what somebody might say on the government side if it looks like they're looking stupid. You know?
Yeah.
They might call me in and say, Friedman, you're old. You want to live a few more years? Keep your darn mouth shut. No, I don't know whether that'll happen, but it hasn't happened so far. I have talked to people who have been told not to talk. And, you know, there isn't much I can do about that. I can't authorize them to talk to me. And occasionally
did they tell you not to talk, though? Would you keep doing what you do, or?
That's a sticky wicket. I'm very careful in what I say. So if I feel they are violating the rules by telling me not to talk, I probably would keep talking. If, you know, suppose somebody that I know slips me a highly classified document that he had kept from 40 years ago. Now, do I have the right to release it? Or if I do and somebody says, you know, you've just violated the law, Friedman, do you want to stay away from that? Do you want to continue to do it? And I probably would say, well, why don't you prosecute me and tell the world that these documents are too classified? Then they've got a Hobbs choice, don't they? As a matter of fact, you know, there's an example of that in a strange way. Philip Klass, who was one of the nastiest of the noisy negativists, debunker #1 for several years. If you look at his FBI file, he's deceased now. If you go to the internet, you can get a copy of Phil's FBI file. They were very unhappy with him because, among other things, in 2 different instances, they wanted to prosecute him for releasing classified information, and then it turned out the only way they could do that would be to release the information. And they decided they'd better not. It was more important, in other words, than prosecuting him was to keep the information secret. So sometimes they have to make choices like that. But there's no doubt that they were unhappy with them. Fascinating reading.
Well, yeah, I know this is kind of a different thing. Yeah, every time you've been on the show, I've been telling you about this last few years. Have you heard anything about the Ely, Nevada UFO crash? It's spelled E-L-Y.
Yes, I only that people have asked me for help, and they've talked to several people. I can picture Ron Regier, who lives out in Nevada. Is it Nevada or Utah? Wait a minute. Yeah, it's Nevada. I have heard about it. You can go to the internet and find out a little bit about it. Have I learned anything useful for those guys? No. Look, any crash saucer story takes one heck of a amount of work to investigate. Partly because most of the ones we've heard about happened a long time ago. For example, in the MJ-12 documents, there's talk about another one in Texas, or the Texas-Mexico border. And people have given me a hard time. Well, it's mentioned, but, you know, what have you done to dig into it? I said, I've done nothing to dig into it because, on the one hand, 2 MUFON guys that live in Texas were pursuing it several years ago. On the other hand, it says in the MJ-12 document that the crash was, that the wreckage, what little there was of it, was taken to Sandia base. And I've been to Sandia when I was a physicist, active. It's a nuclear weapons lab. Anybody who thinks you're going to get any information from them about, oh yeah, remember that wreckage that was brought to you of an alien craft? Why don't you tell me about it? I mean, that's silly. It's not going to happen. So I didn't do anything about it. And do you realize how much effort's been put into Roswell? Remember, we started out with newspaper articles from all over the country. Well, Chicago West anyway. And because we started in 1978, a lot more witnesses were alive. And I was very fortunate. I had located Walter Hout, the base public information officer. He had a copy of the base yearbook. So that made it a lot easier to find people because you could ask Walter about people. He had a list of a few thousand people who were at the base. you usually aren't that lucky. You know, how do you find people? How do you know who was involved?
Yeah.
Well, we started with a good place. Remember, Jesse Marcel was alive when I began that research. Bill Moore and I, in a year and a half, found 62 people connected with Roswell. The old-fashioned way. This is before the Internet, you understand.
Yeah.
The Internet simplifies things. Our phone bills are running pretty darn high. Partly because there are people with the same name, and partly because you're asking Party A to tell you, hey, is Party B on your Christmas list? And, well, let me check. Why don't you get back to me? You know, there's a lot of calling going on, and a lot of traveling going on. So it isn't easy, and I don't envy you the job. One thing that isn't used enough is what I would call what's the program about finding criminals that we want, America's Most Wanted?
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing how good they are at finding people. But you've got tens of millions of people watching the show, and you give names, and so there are an awful lot of people who might be able to help you. One thing I did in California, for example, I got a call about a sighting, and the next day another one about what was clearly the same report, a red light over Los Angeles. And I called the local paper, asked, because it was at like 9 at night in March, good weather, Los Angeles. There should have been loads of people who saw the darn thing. So I got a newspaper to run an article for me, giving my name and number, and I don't know if I had an email address at that time. Probably not, no. And, you know, names won't be used without permission and so forth. And I got this article in the paper. I got 30 responses to it, including somebody who had binoculars and could tell me that it was a plastic bag with a candle in it. And I talked to the fire chief. It had landed on the Wilshire Country Club lawn, and he wasn't about to publicize because of the fire danger. It's pretty dry out there in March. But I got good reports from a lot of people. Nobody exaggerated. Several people told me how they were received when they called the police or the press. What are you drinking, lady? You know? And so what I'm saying is I got enough information to pin down what that was, starting from 2 reports from people I didn't know saw a red light in the sky. You need to spread a wide net. So if you could get newspapers in the area that are read by people in the area, and give them somebody to contact, give a little background. I stressed I'm a nuclear physicist who's been very interested in flying saucers for a long time, and I would like to hear from anybody. And I won't use names without permission. That's very important, because people are very reluctant to report their sightings. So to me, that might be the best way to get more information. You're taking a shot in the dark. And you don't restrict it just to the small town of Eli. You know.
Oh, I was going to... Oh, sorry, you can go ahead.
No, just that, you know, the big cities in here, it's kind of like, when it comes to promoting my lecture, I have to educate people that, look, I've had people drive 100 miles to attend my lecture. So please don't just send the press release to the biggest paper. They're the ones that are deluged with paper, and they got the least space to spend on stuff like this. Send it out to the cities and the radio stations. And my philosophy, and it goes for sightings as well as publicity, everything you do reaches somebody. Nothing you do reaches everybody. So you need a shotgun, not a rifle. That's the way the world is. People's time is pretty precious to them.
Oh, well, I was going to say, I think, 3-4 years ago, I started working on the Ely thing. I put out some newspaper articles, like you were saying, because you gave me a suggestion a few years ago, and I ended up getting a bunch of reports from Arizona and things of different people contacting me, and I started going down to UNLV, the college, looking for different dates and different times where they claim different things happened, and apparently there's some firefighters that went out to the site, apparently, and to make a long story short, I found a bunch of first-hand witnesses. I have newspaper articles. I actually sent them into, say, the Air Force bases around here, seeing what they would say about it, and they wouldn't talk about it. And then MUFON, I didn't think they were going to say anything. I just took a shot in the dark with that. But we're trying to make like a documentary type thing, and I'm trying to think of how to put it.
Ain't easy.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a lot to cover. Yeah, well, MUFON and George Knapp and all, I was contacting them when I first started out, and they were saying that there was no information or it just didn't happen, blah, blah, blah. But I ended up finding at least a couple dozen witnesses. And MUFON, it seems like when I contact them, they give me the runaround as far as who to talk to, or if they know who this person is or that person is. Like, no one will really talk about it. So I guess the question I was wondering was, do you know, it says there's someone named Joan and Patrick O'Connell. It says they were part of MUFON in the 80s and 90s. They were state directors for, I forgot what state it was, but I was wondering, do you know who, have you ever heard of those names?
No. I would ask the old-timers at MUFON. I mean, I've been connected with them for 40 years, but I'm not at the home office, so to speak. People like John Schuessler, who's been with them all that time, and who was the international director for a number of years. So he might be able to find something about them. And you go back through the old issues of the MUFON Journal, you might find. And Dave McDonald, I found, the new director, has been quite cooperative. You got to meet him halfway. I mean, you got to be specific. And, you know, it's kind of like they've just announced that they have 60 notebooks from Leonard Stringfield. Well, it's going to take a while to put that in a form in which, you know, you can computer search it. 60 notebooks, where you're going to look for any particular case, you know what I mean? It's not easy.
Yeah.
So I would try John Schuessler as my first bet. He lives in Colorado. Good man, engineer, incidentally. And he did have a lot of stuff scanned. So certainly they will have lists of section directors and stuff like that.
Because I was told to talk to someone named Chuck Modlin, I think was his name, and he really didn't help me at all. He kind of just gave me the runaround again. I don't know if you know who that guy is.
No, but look, you know, it's kind of like I get used to dealing with a small percentage. Uranium-235 is 1 part in 140 of uranium. So you can say, well, that's not enough to worry about, or you can say, I'm going to figure out a way to concentrate it and build me a nuclear reactor and nuclear bombs and so forth. You know, yes, most sightings, the biggest study ever done, only 21.5% of the cases couldn't be explained. And if you take the attitude of, well, obviously there's nothing to it if you could explain most cases, that's the wrong attitude. Most chemicals don't cure any disease. Most people aren't 7 feet tall. Tell that to the basketball coach. I don't care about the midgets, he says. Give me one big guy, you know. And so most of the people, in any case you go after, an awful lot of the people you talk to aren't going to be very helpful. Poor memories, inadequate attention, call it whatever you want. It's why the police go up and down the street, knocking on all the doors for cases. They know most people probably didn't hear anything that night at, 12:30 in the morning. But you're looking for the 1 or 2 guys that did. And it's kind of like I asked the cop here, police officer in Canada, Fredericton, where I live. I said, look, when you give a lot of publicity to a case and you ask for the public's help, do you get a response? He said, oh, yeah, we get loads of calls. Well, what percentage of those are useful? Well, maybe 3 or 4%, but that's how we solve most crimes. So you got to focus on what's relevant and not be disheartened by the no useful information responses. It's an attitude. And, it's like Neo Salverson, I think, was 606. The 606th drug they tried against, syphilis, whatever it was. there were 605 that didn't work. But, and, another example of that is gold miners will tell you that gold is worth mining if there's less, half an ounce per ton of ore. Think of that. Half an ounce per ton is worth mining. So it's a question of attitude. Don't be discouraged by the questions that don't get answered. Look for the ones that do. I'm an optimist, I guess.
Okay, well, I had two things. First, I was going to ask, do you mind if I email you a couple questions after the show or whatever, or maybe later? Whatever?
Everybody else does. Why shouldn't you?
Well, the last thing I was going to say, before I let my co-host say some questions, I know you dealt with this before with different cases. What do you do about someone that you know was there? They were high up in the military, but they refused to talk about what they've seen. I know you can't force them to talk about it, but is there any way
you
try to persuade them?
Well, I think you try to work around it. A, they have to be sure you're not going to spread any information. B, you might ask things like, who else do you know that was there? Can you refer me to what date it was so I could try to find the day reports? It's kind of like one of the things I found useful in several instances was the flight logs of General Nathan Twining. I found his pilot because I talked to his daughter, and she told me the name of the pilot and roughly where he lived, and I managed to locate him and met with him and got a copy of his flight log. And then I later found a copy of Twining's flight log at the Library of Congress Manuscript Division, which has his papers and Vandenberg's papers and a zillion other people's papers. So you try to see if you can sort of go around the corner. Who might know something, or what other group was stationed there, or, stuff like that. Could you check your flight log if it's that kind of thing? The flight logs aren't classified, generally speaking. I suppose if you're on a top secret mission, they might be. So you have to learn to make do with what you can get, not be discouraged by what you don't get.
Okay, well, we have a question coming in from our chat room which says, what is your opinion on the various other theories relating to Roswell? In example, a book that stated it was a crashed Russian cosmonaut craft.
Well, you don't mean Annie Jacobson's book, which says that Joseph Mengele, Dr. Death, working for Joseph Stalin, made up some strange-looking beings, and the idea was to try to cause a panic the way War of the Worlds did. And they used German technology to get them there. Don't ask me to explain that. It's utter nonsense, and I've written columns for the MUFON Journal about these explanations. There's another one that says Joe Farrell was a guy who wrote a book about it was all Nazi technology. Roswell was. He quotes me at length, probably more than is legally appropriate, but he ignores the objections to what he's saying. If the Germans, for example, there's no question, the Germans had great engineers and scientists. They were ahead of us technologically during much of the war, jet engines and all that sort of stuff. So there's no question that they were sharp. And we actually went over the AMC, Air Materiel Command, General Twining's command, sent guys over there right after the war to collect as much paperwork about all the experiments they did, aeronautics kind of experiments. Brought back literally tons of paper, which they had translated, and people have estimated they saved us $50 million in research costs. So I'm not knocking the Germans. However, I don't think Hitler was a very nice guy. If his guys had figured out how to build something with the flight characteristics of flying saucers, they'd have built them and used them in the war. You think he said, oh, we don't want to devastate the world. No, we'll be nice guys and we'll hold back on this stuff. baloney. And so that's the biggest argument, really, about the German and other things, is that an important point here, incidentally, is that many people don't seem to be able to distinguish between artist concepts, artist drawings. Look what I found. Here's a drawing of a round vehicle. Wow. That doesn't mean it was built. And even the ones that were photographed doesn't mean they worked. In other words, you can build something that looks like something else. That doesn't mean it's going to fly like you want it to fly. Some things that were built never got off the ground. Or the Avro car. A very unstable craft. It was round, but that isn't good enough. So I have seen no other explanations that are suitable, including the one that they were doing radiation shielding experiments using Japanese biologically damaged people to see how they responded to radiation. Well, I spent 3 years doing radiation shielding experiments. That's not the way you do it. And so there's a long list of things. I'm trying to think. I just read something the other day. What was the explanation? I don't know. There are loads of them out there. And Joe Nickel, as I say, an unknown public information officer, put out an unauthorized press release. Well, that got rid of Roswell easy way, didn't it? And another one that bothers me, when Major Marcel talked to Colonel Blanchard about following up on the wreckage that Brazel had brought into the sheriff's office, Colonel Blanchard told him to take one of the counterintelligence corps guys with him, because his concern was who's spying on us. New Mexico's a big empty place. There was more classified work going on there than any other state. So he took out Sheridan W. Cabot, who was counterintelligence. They're always looking for the spies. Now, he was interviewed eventually by Colonel Weaver, and it's in the Big Fat Report. And he says, I remember that. The wreckage covered an area 20 feet square, would easily fit in one vehicle. What? I mean, right from the start, the rancher was concerned about his sheep crossing the debris field. Major Marcel told me in our first conversation that the debris field was maybe 3/4 of a mile long, a few hundred yards wide. That's not 20 feet square. As a matter of fact, the newspaper article on the second day for publicity, July 8th article says, Army captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. The next day, it was Ramey empties Roswell saucer, basically. And it mentioned that the wreckage, radar reflector, weather balloons, etc., covered an area 200 yards in diameter. Now, how do you go from 200 yards in diameter to 20 square feet? Or 20 feet square, no matter how you look at it. It's nonsense. It's a lie. It's false. It's baloney. And the trouble is, the New York Times bought it. Isn't that good enough? Look at the crash test dummy stuff. How absurd. None of them were dropped until years after Roswell. Look at they're trying to make poor Joe Kittinger, one of the world's great pilots. He still holds the record. It may change this year, for jumping out of a balloon at 102,000 feet. He's had all kinds of military missions in Korea and Vietnam. Well, he was a red-haired, and somebody dragged him into the picture. Oh, yeah, he was at Roswell. Was at the base hospital, et cetera, et cetera. And he was a redhead. I must be the guy they were talking about. 1959, he was there. So you were talking about time travel before. Now we got time travel for redheads and for crash test dummies. I mean, that's pretty neat. So, yes, there are loads of stories out there that are baloney. I mean, I don't run a delicatessen. I'm not pushing any products here.
I was going to say, we have about 15 minutes left in the show, and we have a question from our chat room. I don't really know what this is, but the guy's asking, do you know what the Lutz free piston engine is?
The what? How do you spell that?
It's a Lutz, Lutz 3-piston engine?
No, I don't. I won't pretend that I do.
I'm not sure what that is either.
Let me give out my website so they can find out what I do know about rather than what I don't know about. www.stantonfriedman.com. And my email address is fsphys@rogers.com. That's Flying Saucer Physicist, in case you're wondering where that crazy one came from. I tried 10 other ones, they were all taken. So finally I said, I'll pick something that I will remember and nobody else will know what the heck I'm talking about. It's a big subject, flying saucers. There have only been a dozen PhD theses done. These are listed in Top Secret Magic, incidentally. And I'm sure there are more than that, but that I didn't know about because the second edition came out in 2005. But there are studies done overseas. There have been courses taught. Most people are just unaware of how much stuff has been done. And Dr. David Jacobs taught a course for, 30 years at Temple University? Something like 30 years. So there's stuff out there.
Well, here's a quick question I'd like to throw your way that comes from me. A few weeks ago, we had a show done about the Battle for Los Angeles, and I was just wondering if you knew anything about it or what your opinion regarding it is.
Well, I've read the original newspaper articles, even seen the picture, and look, there's no question that a whole bunch of shells were fired at something that was up in the sky. And seemed to hit it, according to some people, but it didn't do any damage, apparently. And let's face it, I was on the East Coast in 42, in New Jersey. We were very worried about attacks coming our way. We had oil refineries. I grew up in Linden, New Jersey. That was the end of the big oil pipeline. We were making 92% of the high-octane fuel used during the war.
Oh, yeah.
Say that again?
Oh, sorry, that's just background.
I didn't understand that.
Oh, I think I have someone in his background, I think.
Oh, anyway, so what I'm saying is Los Angeles was definitely nervous. We were really concerned about people attacking us. People don't seem to realize we were getting our tail kicked at the beginning of World War II. Ships being sunk by submarines out in the Atlantic. The Japanese were successful everywhere they went. The biggest thing about Jimmy Doolittle's raid on Tokyo, was it 30 seconds over Tokyo or something like that, is that what it did, they had to land in China, the pilots. They took off from an aircraft carrier, which is absurd, people thought, and they dropped their bombs and they landed in China. And word went to Jimmy, who led the expedition, one of the world's great flyers before the war, incidentally. He was wanted in Washington as quickly as you can get there. And he thought, well, I guess I'm going to lose my rank. We didn't really do any damage. The reason he was wanted was so that he could be presented with the Congressional Medal of Honor, because that raid had two very important effects. One was the Japanese suddenly realized that they were vulnerable. They got to pull back a lot of protective aircraft and so forth to protect them against these Americans might be attacking us again, And the second thing was, it told America that, there's hope. We're counteracting or counterattacking. It did an enormous amount for, call it public relations, but a lot more powerful than that. So sometimes things don't happen the way you think they happen. No, we didn't do a lot of damage to Japan, but we did a lot of benefit to the war effort. L.A. was vulnerable. A lot of people, I don't know what they saw, whether it was an alien spacecraft, who might very well have suddenly realized that they were the target. I mean, anybody coming here wants to know what our capabilities are. How fast do their airplanes fly? How maneuverable are they? You can call it back engineering if you want, and people use that word as if nobody thought of it before Roswell. All during the war. If an airplane crashed, if a German airplane crashed in England, for example, and didn't blow itself to pieces, we had engineers looking at that stuff. What are they doing? What's the stuff made out of? What can we learn? What systems are there on board the craft that we might be able to benefit from building? Standard practice. So the same goes for aliens. You got to find out what our capabilities are. And, there's a new book that Frank Vicino and I will be talking about. I just got my copy today. The Braxton County Monster, revised edition. And the kicker is that during the war, there were, or not during the war, I'm sorry, in 1952, 51 to 56, 200 military airplanes had fatal crashes. And we forget that orders were given. Shoot them down, UFOs, if they don't land when instructed to do so. Now, I've had 7 different people tell me about cases in which somebody they knew took off to chase UFOs and never came back. So, somebody's paying attention. Rule number 1 is make sure you can get home. So you got to study the characteristics of what's going on, to avoid being destroyed. Not surprising in a war.
No.
Well, I was just curious, Stanton. So, since you said you're a dual citizen in Canada and the U.S.,
yes.
Is it easier to find out UFO information in Canada, or is it like about the same type of deal going on over there?
Well, I've been to the Canadian Archives, the National Archives in Ottawa, and I found cooperation. I've been to 20 archives, or 19 in the U.S., and there is still classified stuff everywhere. Contrary to what somebody says, gee, they got to declassify after 20 years, that's baloney. It's not easy any place, because oftentimes the people you're dealing with don't know what's there. For example, the Eisenhower Library had 250,000 pages of National Security Council material from the Eisenhower era. Now, that was what was so funny about Phil Klass challenging me on the typeface on one of the MJ-12 documents. He would give me $100 each for every genuine document done in the same pica type. He says it should have been elite, you see, because he had 9 documents that were elite type from the National Security Council. He set a limit of 10, unfortunately. And, of course, I found 14. I went to my file cabinet and found a few, but then I was going to the Eisenhower Library anyway. And the thing is that to generalize from the 9 documents that he had to 250,000 pages, if these 9 were all done at the same typewriter, same typeface, then they all were? That's absurd. It's utterly ridiculous. So there isn't anybody who's read all this stuff. There's a record group, 277, the National Archives in Washington, that has Air Force headquarters records from like the early 50s or late 40s to early 50s. 9,000 feet of shelf space the archival materials covered. That's about the equivalent of 1,000 4-drawer filing cabinets.
Oh, man.
Nobody's read all that stuff. So, and you can't go into the files because you don't have access to the classified material. You've got to tell them what you want by looking at finder's aids. So, it's pretty good self-protection, if you will. How's anybody going to find anything that's useful? And the top secret stuff doesn't go into those files, generally speaking.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left in the show. I was going to say, Stanton, is there any way you could talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing in the next few weeks or so?
Sure. Well, I just got back from a science fiction convention, one of the few I've ever attended in Atlanta, and that was great fun. I gave 3 lectures, very well attended. A lot of people wanted my signature on books and so forth. But next week, 14th and 15th, I'll be in Indian Head Resort in Lincoln, New Hampshire, with Kathleen Marden. It's roughly the anniversary of the Betty and Barney Hill case. We had a big conference on the 50th anniversary last year. It was so well attended, they decided to do another one. So I'm looking forward to it. If you go to the files to the internet and get Indian Head Resort in Lincoln, New Hampshire, they have a program for the meeting and so forth. There'll be a bus tour that shows you where everything happened. Kathy will be doing that. She's Betty's niece, I should add again. So I will be speaking at a casino in Minnesota on about the 11th of October. I'll be speaking in 2 of them in Texas, Laredo, Texas. These are on my website, www.stantonfriedman.com. It has an events section and tells you who to contact to get more information. I'll be speaking, next February, that's right, in Arizona, when it's warm as opposed to here where I live. And the big conference there. And there are a couple of others that are on the schedule. I'm going, there's a World UFO conference in Brazil, December 6th through 9th. I'll be there. It'll be warm there, too. Although, well, winter in Brazil isn't very cold. So there are several more of these places on the docket, www.stantonfriedman.com, events. And that'll keep people going. Now, who knows? There may be more added to this. I never know where I'm going to be speaking.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a couple people asking, this Wednesday at 5 o'clock Pacific p.m., we're going to have Stanton Friedman on the show with Frank Pacino for the 60th anniversary of the Braxton County Monster, which is going to be an interesting show. Again, Stanton will be back with us. Again, I'd like to thank you for going back on the show with us, Stanton.
My pleasure.
And again, I'd like to thank our listeners for asking questions and joining us. And I'll let my co-host say bye to you up until Wednesday, I guess.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stanton. I guess we'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again.
Good night.
All right. Take good care.
Bye.